Speaking of markets, one more market to touch on as we wrap up here. I think Montana made some news, so finally signed their bill into law. Montana made a lot of waves. It was one of the only red states. I think Alaska was maybe the first red state, and then Montana and South Dakota. But after a lot of apparently heated discussions in their state government, they finally got something across the line, and it sounds like people are relatively happy with it, but not as happy as they'd like to be. But it is still, I think, a win in some ways. The things that I think stand out is a pretty high tax rate at 20%. Again, going back to access and pricing is a big deal, right? And making sure that you can get it at a reasonable price, is important, and taxes impact that, certainly, as we've seen in markets like California. It does have home grow. I think it's 2 plants instead of 4 plants. I'm sitting here in Seattle. We still don't have home grow, still illegal for one of the oldest original markets, which is crazy. So that's, I think, a good thing that a place like Montana is permitting that. I would say the negative is that they are introducing flower potency limitations or potency caps. And this is kind of a big concern in the industry, kind of seeing a trend like this. But that said, the potency cap seems pretty high at 35%. And this is flower, right? So this isn't a concentrate. This is an extract. You can still have higher potency, for things like extracts, but just flower on its own, 35%, which I think is pretty high, just from my anecdotal exposure out there. There may be plenty of strains and plenty of producers that break that cap out there, but it's not. It could be a lot worse. Could be a lot lower. But just it seems to kind of crack the door open more and more for things like this. I believe it's the second state in the nation. I think it was Vermont that signaled that they're going to have some potency caps as well. Very small population in Vermont. It's a small population in Montana too. I think about 1 million residents there. So what is that, like a 20% of a Colorado market? So just some news out of Montana. I mean, it's great that it's coming together, but like every state, they're doing it a little bit differently. And we'll start seeing sales January 1st, 2022. Any thoughts on what to expect out of Montana?
I mean, I would just say that, this is still early innings. They could change their mind. They could realize that nobody wants to do business there because there's no way to make money. Maybe this is an opportunity for the mom and pops, because I don't think the big MSOs are gunning for a state like Montana or any of those other states, which begs the question, which I wonder anybody could chime in here, but if you wait too long, if you're one of these states that are really waiting too long, okay, so federal legalization happens, then you get then there will likely be a federal excise tax of 10, who knows what it's going to be. Then what do you do if you're a state? You're going to have to lower your state tax revenue, because you're going to then have more competition from the illicit market. So you're almost like, not, some of those revenues may be jeopardized. Budgets may not come to fruition if they get too restrictive, or if they act, if they delay things too long. So I don't know. I don't really know, and I don't understand. I don't understand why. Well, obviously every state is illegal by now, but I just don't understand what they're thinking in terms of practicality, in terms of how a business is going to operate, under some kind of confine like that.
I think that high tax rate, we've seen it play out here in California. It keeps your illicit market nice and alive and well. So you have to be really thoughtful about the tax rate that you apply to these. I mean, I'm about to hit order on my Spark basket, and I can't wait for the sticker shock of seeing the taxes pile on as I hit that order button. So, it's painful, and I have disposable income. So people who are a little bit more on a budget, they're going to struggle to find that acceptable. And I think that drift into the illicit market is very easy at that point. So it kind of defeats the purpose. And I also think that, Montana has a real issue with meth. I know this, again, from my past life, because I was doing some work for philanthropic organizations that are trying to create support systems around keeping people from drifting into the meth world. And I think that trying to understand the way people relate to cannabis versus various opioids and other drugs that are that are physically addictive, I should say, period, full stop. I think that Montana should be thinking about this a little differently. But, you make a good point. It's a deep red state, and I bet there are more guns and horses than there are cannabis plants in the state to begin with. So, and more than people actually. So, it doesn't turn my world on fire from an investment standpoint, but I love the idea of people having access to it. And it's a beautiful place. So, wouldn't it be fun to be consuming cannabis and running around the beautiful landscape there? I think it sounds pretty ideal.
Or maybe
I'd do a diligence trip.
Maybe they just wait until, interstate commerce is no longer applicable and legalization, and then, then the floodgates open, and then if you want the product and you live in Montana, so be it. You don't have to worry about, going out, and then businesses don't have to really think about, planting a stake there. They could just ship it and all kinds of things. So, I don't know. It's not too many states are really left, though, that have, nothing in terms of, cannabis laws or CBD or whatever, right? There's, I don't want to say maybe 10. Yeah.
Our work here is done.
Now, if we only get Texas across the line, it'd be good.
Talk about guns. I know, Sai, that you wanted to bring up this thing about New York too, about the article that came out in the New York Times. It reminds me of what we're talking about now, which is that there's always this lag time of catching up on the supply demand curve, and we've seen it in most markets when they open. And I think that it's a really interesting question of why it happens. What's the chicken and egg scenario? I think it has a lot to do with the way the regulatory framework sets the operators up to succeed or fail. And I think that the lag in that is what creates this issue in terms of being able to keep the product flowing into the shelves and onto the shelves, I should say. But in New York, it's been a pretty rough situation. I know my friends who do have medical cards there for actual serious conditions like MS have really struggled to get good products because of the operators there just not functioning at the highest level. And I don't really know per se what's happening there. I should exclude Columbia Care from this because I don't know. I don't have friends who've shopped at that location, but people who've been in some of the other ones have really struggled to get good quality product for their condition. So it's an interesting question about why that supply-demand curve continues to be such a mismatch at the opening of these markets.
Listen to High Rise on all major streaming platforms and watch the visual on YouTube.